Hi, welcome to this podcast where we will explore and examine various thought-provoking books to identify their content's deep meaning and purposes, transferring them into practical applications for everyday living. We will identify their primary attributes, relevance, and application in our lives. So this month, we're doing the book entitled Going from Strength to Strength, Finding Success and Happiness and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. It was written by Arthur C. Brook in 2022. So I chose this book because I'm not at my second half yet, but it's in the future, as it is for everyone. So I thought, gee, I really should read this book and see what he has to say. And I have to tell you that he has some great nuggets of information that are really relevant and really applicable, especially to my life. In this book, Brook explains how the end of your career is a perfect time to start a new career and step on to the second curve of happiness and satisfaction. He says, as abilities diminish and careers end, he says, it is natural to feel hard feelings. And this book acknowledges this and provides advice on how to cope with them. But it also offers numerous examples of how inevitable changes in lives of great people, he talks about very famous people, were new beginnings that did not necessarily involve suffering. So basically, the book gives you examples of various individuals who were very successful and how they transitioned in their second half of life. Some people did it more successful than others. Some people really were able to fall into the change and learn and grow and give back, and others not so much. In this book, every word and recommendation are derived from science, philosophy, theology, and history in order to help you learn how to break free from old habits and reinvent yourself. So here I'm just going to give you a title of each chapter, and then we'll go into more in-depth to discuss each one. So chapter 1 is entitled, Your Professional Decline is Coming Much Sooner Than You Think. Here he discusses a decline in career and what is behind it, as well as how to approach it positively. So as to turn into an opportunity rather than a failure. So how you approach that second half is really key. Chapter 2 is called the second curve. Describes a second curve in your life when you start a new vocation and lifestyle, which adds meaning to the second half of your life. It makes you happier and more satisfied than ever before. And it's true. For some people, their second half is the most productive time of their life. Now, chapter 3 is entitled Kick Your Success Addiction. Describes how success is an addiction and what workaholism is. You'll learn about losing your self-identity because of compulsion to succeed and how it destroys your relationships, which it does. Chapter 4, Start Chipping Away. And here this is about getting rid of stuff that doesn't add value to your life and keeping the things that do in order to create a new life around them. Chapter 5, Ponder Your Death. This is the second time we've seen this theme, which is really interesting. Explores the idea of death and how it affects an individual's perception and changes their priorities for the better. Physical death, he says, is compared to professional death in this chapter to highlight that one can and indeed should be reborn after professional death. Yes, your career will change. It may end, but you will step into a new life. Chapter 6 is called Cultivate Your Aspen Grove. Here he compares how trees build huge interconnected systems with their roots and to how people are connected to one another in similar ways. Chapter 7, entitled Start Your Spiritual Journey, explores how a lot of people use spirituality and religion as a way to cope with declining career prospects and how to approach spirituality and religion if it comes to play for the first time in a very long time. Chapter 8, Make Your Weakness Your Strength. I thought this chapter was the most insightful, and it really provided some new information that I did not know, and really helpful information. It's about looking at every weakness as an opportunity to grow stronger, and it must be embraced with an open mind, he says, since pain and suffering can boost your productivity and help you find your calling. Isn't that an interesting idea, that pain and suffering can boost your productivity and help you find your calling? Chapter 9 is entitled Cast into the Falling Tide. He describes how changes, because changes are inevitable, are a natural part of human existence, and that there is nothing more permanent than change. It can help you cope with fear or of change and embrace the opportunities that come with it. So let's look at chapter 1. Your professional decline is coming much sooner than you think. He says the more accomplished one is at the peak of one's career, most likely, if you're a professional, that's true, the more pronounced the decline seems once it has set in. It's true. This book was written as a life experience for him. He quit a very high-profile position as a president and CEO and decided to spend a year writing this book, and that was difficult. He said that he would wake up in the morning and he'd be like, what am I doing today? Where am I going? What business do I have to attend to? And there wasn't any. So it was difficult for him. He says it's very hard to admit that it's time. We're experts at denial. We have been successful because we refuse to accept the overwhelming odds at making it in our profession. So early in our development, denial is a positive. So basically, he says that a lot of people, they want to deny that their career is changing or ending, or that they have to stop doing what they're doing. They really are in denial. But inevitably, it does happen for most people. And he says that at this point, you have to do something useful with your life. For him, it was writing a book. And for others, it's going to be something different. In this chapter, he discusses academic researchers' results in 2007 that found that senior citizens who never really felt useful, this is where he makes the point, you have to find something useful to do when you retire, were nearly 3 times as likely as those who frequently felt useful to develop a mild disability, listen to what happens, and more than 3 times as likely to have died during the course of the study. So these senior citizens who retired, didn't really have anything useful to do, ended up dying early. It's so true. I've seen it. He says great gifts and achievements early in life are simply not an insurance policy against suffering later on. So like himself, he was a very prestigious individual in his career. There's no guarantee that after that career, you're going to have prestigious senior life. He says, on the contrary, studies show that people who have chased power and achievement in their professional lives tend to be unhappier after retirement than people who did not. It's true. So if you spend the first half of your life being very productive and having prestige and power, to go without that is a huge transition. So this is where he talks about in chapter 2, he says, get on the second curve. And in this book, he gives a visual, and in the visual, he shows 2 arches. The first one is called your fluid intelligence, and it goes like this, and then it goes down. So basically, in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you're really using your fluid intelligence, and that's really aiding your professional development. But eventually, he said, it does decline. It just does. You're not as relevant as you used to be. And he shares a story of this one professional who was he was going high in his fluid intelligence. Then he retired and went back to his job to visit his other coworkers, and they were like, what are you doing here? He just wasn't relevant anymore, and it was really hard for him to receive that. He said, but on this visual he shares, there's this first curve, but then there's a second curve, and he calls that your crystallized intelligence, which actually this curve keeps going up. So what he's recommending that you do, you have to jump from the first curve that declines to the second curve called your crystallized intelligence, because he says decline is inevitable. So let me define these 2 terms. Fluid intelligence, he said, is defined as the ability to reason, think, flexible, and solve novel problems. Yes. That's what you need to get ahead in life initially, but then it does decline. Whereas crystallized intelligence is defined as the ability to use the stock of knowledge you learned in the past. Our greatest gift later in life is wisdom. So this is what crystallized intelligence brings. It brings wisdom, in which learning and thought create a worldview that can enrich others. So really think about when you're in your second half of life, the first thing you need to think about is how can I be useful to other people? Use that crystallized intelligence. He says our natural ability at this point is to maybe do some counseling, mentoring, advising, teaching others in a way that does not amass worldly rewards of money, power, or prestige, but you're giving back. He said it requires courage and fortitude to make changes in our lives and careers to become more of a teacher, whatever that means in one specific field. Not everyone wants to do that. Many refuse. Now, this is so true because you're not going to be, remember that fluid intelligence goes down. You have to jump on that second curve and you have to think about where can I be useful? Where can I contribute? Where can I help other people? And I remember when I was teaching grad students, many of them, this was their second career. They realized that first one really wasn't meeting their needs. And so really they were looking to do something. Most of them were looking to do teaching. He says, no matter how you find your passion, he says, early on, pursue it with a white-hot flame, dedicated to the good of the world. Who can I contribute to? Where can I be useful? But hold your success lightly, he says. Be ready to change as your abilities change. And this is a key point. Change is inevitable. He says, every change of circumstance is a chance to learn, grow, and create value. Get on your second curve. Jump from what rewards fluid intelligence to what rewards crystallized intelligence. Learn to use your wisdom, and this is true. You've gained this wisdom through life experiences. You're on the second curve. You really can be an asset to everyone around you. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a boardroom. It doesn't necessarily have to be standing at a podium. You can share your wisdom to everyone wherever you go. He says the three things you need to start doing right now to make the second curve better than the first. Remember, jump on that second curve. And it's interesting because the rest of the book is about these three things. Develop your relationships. That's number one. Start your spiritual journey, number two, and embrace your weaknesses, which is something really hard for people to hear. Embrace your weaknesses. But that was chapter 8, and I love that chapter. So here he shares a lot about different musicians because he himself was a musician before he started his professional teaching career. And he shares the story of Bach, who obviously we know was a very famous musician. But towards the end of his life, he actually went deaf. And so then through this weakness, he decided to actually help his son with his career. And that's really, his son became even more famous than him. You have to reinvent yourself, he says. And how will you? Serve in the latter end of your life, and whom you will serve. So think about it. You're on the second curve. You want to be useful, you want to contribute, and you want to serve others. How are you going to do that? That's really where you're going to find your fulfillment. And then in chapter 3, he talks about kick your success addiction. And here, he really goes into what creates workaholism. Why do people work so hard? And what happens when you work so hard? And what happens when you're working 60, 80 hours a week? In this chapter, I love this little vignette he shares, which demonstrates this whole concept of workaholism. He tells the story of the psychologist Wayne Oates in the 1960s, who actually coined the phrase workaholism and wrote all about it, where he was so busy that his son called his office to make an appointment with the father so he could see the father, which I thought was such a funny story. That was the only way the son was going to get to see his father, if he made an appointment at his father's office. Anyway, so this guy, Oates, defined workaholism in 1971 as a compulsion or uncontrollable need to work incessantly. So basically, that's what workaholism is. He says workaholism feeds fear and loneliness, and fear and loneliness feed workaholism. And I've seen people who just stay at the office and just work, and I'm like, well, don't they have people to go home to? Don't they have something else to do? But that's what workaholism is. And sometimes, obviously, some people have to work those long hours. Workaholics have many of the same patterns, he says, of behavior and estrangement with their spouses as alcoholics do, he says. The addict feels misunderstood and under attack and engages in secretive behavior. And then he shares how that some people, what drives their success is actually, and their need to do great things, is it's really like a low-level depression. And he actually shares about Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln, who both struggle with depression. And he believes that the depression drove them to be successful, which I do believe is probably true. He said, we love the image of ourselves as successful, not ourselves in true life. So what if you don't do the great thing and you still value who you are? So then he said, how do you get beyond this workaholism and getting on that second curve? He says, start chipping away. What does that mean? He basically, get rid of the things you don't really need. He says, to get off the first curve and onto the second, instead of adding more and more to our lives, we need to understand why this doesn't work, and then start taking things away. For example, you don't need 5 houses, you don't need 10 cars, he even talked about, like, you don't need 5 of this one shirt. It's true. It's really true. He recommends that you look at the idols that you are worshiping, and he actually does this exercise with his students, where he asks them, which one would you define as your idol? And he gives the students these choices: money, power, pleasure, or honor. Which one are you pursuing? Which idol are you pursuing? Money, power, pleasure, or honor? And basically what he's saying is chip away at those. Don't make them your idols anymore. These are what actually usually drive people to become extremely successful. And any unbalance and any attachment to these is an unbalanced. If you're pursuing money and never seeing your family, that's unbalanced. Or if you're pursuing power and whatever to get that power, what's the cost? So any one of these can become unbalanced. He says the unhappiest people were consistently those paying the most attention to how they performed relative to others. So basically he talks about comparisons and how bad it is to compare yourself to others. Like, well, that guy has 5 cars and I only have 1. So any kind of comparison actually causes you to feel less than, and this is what pursues you pursuing more. He says the small rush of pleasure we get from being envied by others 1 minute is swallowed up by the unhappiness from having less than someone else the next minute. So there's that whole comparison piece. He says people don't realize their unhealthy attachments to these idols in life until they suffer a loss or illness that makes the important things come to focus. It's true. It's true. A lot of people, after they suffer a loss or maybe, a cancer diagnosis or something, usually start recalculating their lives and saying, well, what's really important to me? What really matters? He has a quote in the book, and I'm going to read it here. He says, he has most who needs least. He has most who needs least. It's true. He says, basically, he's saying that true satisfaction is being content with what you have and staying in the moment. So he talks a lot about contentment and staying in the moment. So now we're on to chapter 5. And once again, this is a theme that we've seen twice now in 2 consecutive books. Ponder your death. And this is a quote from Theo Tolstoy. And he says, they say, live in such a way as to always be ready to die. I would say, live in such a way that anyone can die without you having anything to regret. That's really key. That is really key. He says, contemplating death can even make life more meaningful. It's true. It's true. And then he talks in this chapter about taking a risk. I mean, if you knew you were going to die, when we're all going to die, but if your death was imminent, what would you do differently? How would you still pursue power, money, prestige, and honor? What would you do differently? And he talks actually about maybe taking a risk, since you only have this one life. And the fact is, it made me start thinking, okay, what can I do? What can I do differently, and what risk can I take? He says, scarcity makes everything dearer to us. Remembering that life won't last forever makes us enjoy it all the more today. He says, we should not avoid the truth. We should stare right at it, contemplate it, consider it, meditate on it. That death is inevitable, yes. So now how do we deal with that? What do we do differently? Chapter 6 talks about cultivating your aspen grove. And here he says that humans are naturally interconnected biologically, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, and spiritually. Creating an isolated self is dangerous and damaging because it's unnatural. And really, it's called Cultivate Your Aspen Grove because when you look at the research about trees, there's a lot of research now about trees and how trees, when they're in a similar grove, the roots are interconnected. They're all connected. They're all one. He said, the secret to bearing my decline, he said, no, enjoying it, is to be more conscious of the roots linking me to others. You want to be conscious of who are the people in your life, who are the people that matter to you. He says, what are you contributing to others? So once again, useful, contributing, serving, that's how you're going to really benefit from your second curve. He says it requires giving what people want and need, not that which is most convenient to the giver. So it's not about doing what you think people need, what's convenient for you. It's doing what actually people need. If I am connected to others in love, my decrease will be more than offset by increases to others, it's true, which is to say increases to other facets of my true self. So when you're contributing to others, when you're helping others, when you're actually being relevant, when you're actually doing something useful, you'll find that it really helps you. It helps you feel good that you're using your life to benefit others. He said the crystallized intelligent curve is predicated on interconnectedness. Without it, my wisdom has no outlet. It's true. You can have all this wisdom, but if there's no one around you that you can share it with, if there's no one around you that you can contribute it with, what is it worth? What is it worth? He says in terms of health outcomes, loneliness is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes per day and is worse than obesity. It is also strongly associated with cognitive decline and dementia. This is so true. This is so true. The kind of people who don't know how to manage social interactions outside of work get lonelier when they retire. It's very true. It's very true. You need to find, and he actually talks about in this chapter, finding groups of people so to create that social connectedness with groups of people who have the same values, ideals that you have, maybe have the same vision and purpose, and that's a great place to build community. He said, wrapped up in their fear of falling behind, success-addicted workaholics, like all people controlled by their addictive behavior, leave little room in their lives for friends and family. And here he's talking about cultivate your aspen grove, grow your community. Studies have also shown that loneliness is linked to burnout among leaders. So this is a real threat to those that are leaders. It's easy to be isolated and not build community. The relationships that best mitigate loneliness, he talks about our romantic partnerships and close friends. It says the important thing for health and well-being is relationship satisfaction, and this is how he describes it. Best friends get enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning from each other's company. They bring out the best in each other. They gently tease each other. They have fun together. And then he talks about your romantic partnership is arguably your most important relationship, but you also can be single and happy if you have other close, fulfilling family, links, and friendships. He says the number of real friends needs to be more than 0 and more than just your spouse. So let's look at chapter 7, which is your spiritual journey, chapter 7. He says mountains of research show that religious and spiritual adults are generally happier and generally suffer less depression than those who have no faith. He says your spiritual development is that important. You must make the time by scheduling your meditation, prayer, reading, and practice every day. He says go on a gratitude walk. We talked about this before. It's the practice of focusing on the positive events in your life while walking, helping you to savor happiness by amplifying gratitude. So let's look at chapter 8, making your weakness your strength. The secret to going from strength to strength is to recognize that your weakness, your loss, your decline can be a gift to you and others. Can you imagine that that's true? He says that finding meaning in your suffering and then sharing it is really, that's where you're going to be living your life to the fullest. And then the research is so clear. Sadness has persisted in the face of evolution because it brings cognitive benefits. And actually, the research shows, and there was an entire page on how difficulty, loss, sadness helps you see things differently, think through things differently. It's such a benefit to you. You don't realize it. There is evidence that it makes us better at assessing reality in social situations because we are less likely to flatter ourselves or gloss over negative truths. This is so true. Sadness, he says, can make us even more productive at work by enhancing focus and helping us to learn from mistakes. Weaknesses befall us all, and in many ways, it has its discomforts, to be sure, and entails losses. But it also is an opportunity to connect more deeply with others, to see the sacredness in suffering, even to find new areas of growth and success. Stop hiding. Don't resist it. Don't resist it. Listen to what he says here. When you are honest and humble about your weaknesses, you will be more comfortable in your own skin. So let's look at chapter 9, the last chapter. Cast into the falling tide. Change is inevitable. Significant change in your life occurs on average every 18 months. Listen to that. And he calls life quakes like his, or those that involve a voluntary or involuntary career change happen very regularly. Most are involuntary. You might be laid off when something happens, and that's unwelcome at the time. But nothing is more predictable, he says, than change. Almost every transition, even the most difficult ones, bear some positive fruit. We usually see and treasure it in the long run. Painful periods can stimulate intense, expressive productivity. So this is what he says you need to do. There are 4 learning steps to becoming. He calls it a modern elder, Evolve from the fixed mindset to the growth mindset, number 1. Number 2, learn openness to new things. Number 3, collaborate with teams. And number 4, counsel others. He says, he asks you to ponder the next phase of life with these questions. Listen to what they are. What activities will you keep? What activities will you evolve and do differently? What activities will you let go of? And what new activities will you learn? 7 words he says to remember: use things, love people, and worship the divine. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this podcast Purpose, where I share unconventional ideas, information, and research. I hope you implement some of these suggestions. I know I have. I've already started thinking about what I'm going to risk and what risk I'm going to take. And I hope to see you next month as we listen to what I'm reading now, Live with Purpose. Have a great month, and take a look at Arthur C. Brook's book, because it's really very informative and insightful. Thanks for joining me. Great having you.